Hello and welcome to today's webcast, How API Technology Connects the Transportation Economy. This event is sponsored by our friends at SMC3 and their annual kickoff event, Jumpstart 2017. My name is Jeff Berman, and I am Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine. Joining me today are Danny Slayton, Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer for SMC3, and David Knight, SMC3 CIO. Today we will examine transactional APIs versus analytical APIs for speed and ease of use. There will be a brief Q&A period following our presentation, so please send your questions as we proceed. To get things started, I'll pass the mic over to Danny Slayton at SMC3. Danny, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to everybody who's joined us today on the webinar. Here's our agenda. We're going to start with a little bit of background information about SMC3 and then lay some groundwork about basics of web services and APIs, how they're used in the general economy. Then we're going to move to LTL transportation APIs, what we call the current state of that economy, and then the emerging state. What is the next step that we're moving into? We'll talk throughout the conversation about some of the concerns and constraints of these APIs. Finally, we'll talk about the future state, which is what we call a transportation platform, and we'll discuss it through our definition of the SMC3 platform. Okay, a little bit about SMC3. We've been servicing the transportation market for several decades, actually, focusing on the LTL market. Our value is bringing standardization, benchmarking, analytics to the LTL transportation market. We serve all of the constituencies. The carriers provide us with their data. We help them develop pricing, and then we distribute that pricing through various technologies. We started with mainframe technologies, moved to a PC, went through the .com area, moved to network computing. Now we're moving to the cloud and various types of APIs. Most of our product delivery to the 3PLs, the logistics service providers, or the shippers are through a technology partner. Could be a TMS system, could be an enterprise level system, might be a warehousing system. We serve as an internal component within that system. Think of it as a black box that would provide rating, points of service and transit time, other data that is required to rate an LTL shipment or manage an LTL shipment. And that's what the basis of this conversation about APIs is. We are a trusted business partner within that community. We deal with about 100 supply chain technology partners. We have long-standing relationships with the motor carrier industry. I think we've proven our business stability over those decades. And a real big issue that we'll talk about throughout the presentation is whenever we deal with pricing in the industry, we're dealing with highly confidential information, proprietary information. How do we guard and manage that data security?
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about APIs and give a little bit of background. API stands for Application Programming Interface. Per Wikipedia, it's defined as a set of definitions and protocols that provide the foundation for building applications. That term was really born out of the software development community years and years ago, and around operating systems as well. And it's a term that's actually become really prevalent in the transportation industry. Remote APIs were really the first piece of that equation, where we were talking about remote connectivity, and that evolved into what we call today web APIs. The 1.0 version is essentially what's been happening over the last 8 to 10 years, and now we're really starting to see the adoption rate of the 2.0 version, which is REST, JSON, and we'll get into all the details of all those technologies, but it's evolving. But the big piece of the equation that's starting to happen is we're starting to consume APIs from many different sources. This next graph talks a little bit about that, or diagram. So this is an example of tapping into many different APIs, pulling them together and delivering a new solution to the marketplace. In this example, we're pulling tracking information, transit information, pricing, and fuel, and we're aggregating all that information and delivering a new solution to the marketplace. That's really what we're starting to see happen. People are doing things differently today. They're consuming information differently than they have in the past, and pulling all that together and delivering solutions completely different than they have in the past. Let's talk a little bit about the marketplace as a whole. Again, APIs, and I'm just alluding to it, but we're starting to see innovation happening throughout the supply chain. It's happening within the carrier industry. It's happening within the 3PLs, within the technology providers, the TMS providers. And it can be in a disruptive change. A good example of that's Uber. Uber's been around a little while now. The technology that Uber has was not solely developed within their four walls. They consumed other technologies, aggregated those technologies, and delivered something brand new to the marketplace. That's what we're starting to see with the transportation industry. We're seeing more and more of it every day. Another good example where not only are you delivering a disruptive change, but you're also pulling in new intelligence and value to the proposition is with the travel industry, where you've got airlines providing information directly to consumers, evolving to airlines information now being consumed by these third parties like a Priceline, Orbitz, Trivago, and putting additional value and putting it at the consumer's hands. So now, all of a sudden, instead of looking at one airline, a Delta, I'm looking at all the airlines and looking at all the possible pricing out there. And so it's putting intelligence in the hands of the consumer so they can make a more intelligent decision. And we're seeing more and more of that evolve into the transportation industry, where we're now delivering applications on mobile devices. You'll hear these terms, execution and analytical services, and really the cloud's what's driving that. People are now rolling solutions out in the marketplace very, very quickly. The carriers now are making investments in those technologies and making that information available to consumers. And it really starts to you start looking at providers and who are the players in the marketplace. And it goes back to the first slide of when you start talking about a trusted provider and looking at the data components and pieces with that. The graph on the right side really is the adoption curve of the API technology. We've seen that evolution happen over the last 8 to 10 years, and it's continuing to escalate, and we don't see it going in the other direction. Again, carriers are providing information, and technology providers are looking at different ways to consume that information for different parts of the supply chain.
Well, let's talk about the current state of the API play in the LTL industry. There's a lot of companies, both traditional companies like us and newly emerging companies that are addressing this problem. And right now, the race is to build the network. How many of these carrier-based APIs can you bring into your network? The service-wise, they are very specific. So they're handling a specific transaction. Get me a rate, show a status message for a shipment, provide me with a bill of lading, things that are one-to-one in nature. They serve both the execution side, give me a rate, to the visibility side, show me where my shipment is. In this world, there's not a lot of intelligence being added to the transaction. They require some sort of human resource to interpret or to bring into the consumer's system to make it work. They're designed to function uniquely. And the big emphasis, as we said, is to just get carriers into the system. Along the way, with carriers, and everybody, there's been some concern about all this data, pricing data, transit time data, customer data, moving around through the cloud. Who has access to those data? What is the protocol? Who is the rightful owner of the data? And we'll talk about that throughout the process. We think we're moving into a new state of the development of these products. We call it transactional plus analytical services. And what we found out is that a specific transaction may need an analytical service, which is a high-speed delivery of multiple events, or it may just need a transactional event. Think in terms of I need a rate versus I need to rate these 50,000 shipments. Along the way, as people learn more and more about these API connections, they have to be designed to support the entire supply chain. That not only includes carriers, shippers, 3PLs, but obviously the technology providers who consume this and other downstream parties, consultants, freight payment, et cetera. In order to do that well, we get into some of SMC3's core value, and that's standardization of data. In order to be easily consumed by the TMS and eventually the consuming party, standardization is key. A carrier, if you have 10 carriers in your core carrier group, each one of those carriers will express their status shipment slightly different. They'll express rates and how they manage charges differently. All that stuff needs to be translated into a common language, if you will, so the consumer doesn't have to do that. That's core value that would be provided by a technologist like us. We also see that as you do standardization and as you build your network, start consuming various API services, that you begin to handle things at an event level, not just a transaction level. And so you have to build that into your technology. And that technology or that ability to manage an event improves process automation, it improves the quality of the process, and it improves productivity for whoever your customer is. It will allow for execution of the APIs, visibility, planning, optimization, the entire supply chain event.
Another big piece you need to think about with this is really your infrastructure. It does require physical and operational resiliency and redundancy when you're talking about processing millions of transactions a day and affecting the whole supply chain from end to end. So you really have to think through that. Security is another big piece that needs to be looked at from the beginning. When you develop your applications and consuming this information, you need to be thinking about security from both the consumer side, but also from the receiver side. Neutrality. So Danny mentioned earlier a little bit about data and some of the concerns around that. SMC3 has always been a neutral party in the supply chain. We take data ownership and the competitive advantages of that data very seriously. So as part of a solution with this, that needs to be part of the overall thought process of delivering that solution to the marketplace.
Fine. A lot of people are seeing APIs as being a direct substitute for the EDI application. Certainly, EDI is well ingrained in the supply chain. For somebody who doesn't have EDI, that might be a solution, but our opinion is EDI still has some time, and we'll wait and see on that. Okay. We want to move now to what we call the future state, where as we build out the network, as we start dealing with different types of APIs, where is this going? And we think that for ourselves, it's moving towards a transportation platform, where you would have the best of API worlds. You'd be able to do a lot of different things. But I want to talk specifically more about the difference between an analytical API and a transactional API. We call them execution and visibility APIs that provide very specific events, whereas a analytical API is also very specific. It could be for rating, or it could be for transit time, or a combination of both. Here's an example. If you're a shipper or a 3PL and you manage 50,000 LTL shipments a year, and you want to analyze 5 carriers to determine how to award them freight or what lanes to provide them, that would be 250,000 rating transactions. At the current speed of the transactional APIs, the carrier-based APIs, that processing would take 7.2 days of processing. Now, if you were using a high-speed analytical API, such as our product RateWare XL, that 7.2 days drops down to under 10 minutes. Now, we know that the carrier APIs are going to get faster, but that's a heck of a gap to make up. Won't be made up anytime in the near future. So that illustrates the different types of APIs. Another thing that you should be aware of is that if you go onto a carrier's website and try to do 50,000 lookups, some bad things can happen. You could shut down the carrier's website because it's not built for that type of transaction. The carrier could block you after a certain number of transactions or throttle you down. So keep in mind that is not the purpose of the carrier APIs. They serve great purposes, but high-speed analytics is not one of them. In a transportation platform, you would be able to orchestrate whether you need to use what type of API really fits the problem you're trying to solve.
So I want to dive a little bit deeper into the analytical APIs. They have to be designed industrial strength for high speed. As Danny alluded to, you could be processing 250,000 shipments. You could be processing millions of shipments on a daily basis in some cases. It has to be a big factor in what you look at. Some functions that you would look at potentially using through an analytical API: freight bill audit, contract management, planning, optimization. And all those are typically using pricing and transit information to drive that across multiple carriers, as Danny alluded to. And you're starting to look at class, different types of rating applications, whether it be class-based, density-based, other even rating solutions such as truckload, parcel. And again, speed, reliability, and security are all got to be part of the consideration with the application. When we deploy our applications such as RateWare and Carrier Connect, those are the three tenets we build off of. Security being at the top, speed and reliability being the pillars under that to make sure you've got a complete solution in the marketplace. Execution and visibility APIs start to drive transactional things with rate, shipment, status, and imaging. When you think about visibility and execution, start with execution where you're dispatching a shipment, you're looking up a general price, you're getting a pro number. That is one of the big challenges we've heard from our interviews and working through our partners is when do you get that pro number? Today I may do a dispatch request and I get a pickup number back, but I really need that pro number. So that has to be part of the overall solution when you're driving this in the marketplace. From a visibility perspective, there's shipment status where you're tracking the life cycle of that shipment all the way through, all the way to the point where I need a proof of delivery document. So as a transportation platform, you have to start looking at all these pieces and look at driving it to a more holistic solution. With this diagram showing from left to right, left being planning and optimization, where you're doing that processing 100 to 150,000 shipments. Driving into execution, where you're actually moving the shipment through the supply chain with the pro number and dispatch we mentioned. Then you start looking at shipment status and tracking while it's in flight, and then actually when it's being delivered from an imaging perspective. But then on the back end of that, you may be doing freight bill and audit, where you're executing multiple thousands of shipments looking across days and weeks of transportation information. The power of all these things, any one of these pieces is good, but working them all together where it's from a complete solution really starts to drive the value into the supply chain. That's where the game changer starts to come in play. It's not just connectivity. It's actually starting to drive different ways to think about it. When we talked back in the first couple of slides talking about looking at solving problems differently. Event-based visibility, that's a big one in that you're now looking at the exceptions. You want to know things earlier than later. You don't want to have to pick up a phone call. Make a phone call to a carrier, pick up the phone and make the phone call to the carrier to get that information. You want to be able to know that's happening, make a decision, and make a change in your supply chain dynamically. Message standardization, when you start thinking about error codes and status codes and document types. If I make a call to get a status code back If I get that status code back from 10 different carriers, the code needs to essentially mean the same thing. When you're talking about error codes, if I get error code 1 back that means pickup delayed, I want to be able to get that error code 1 meaning the same thing for the consumer. So standardization becomes a big, big part, because what's happened, and we've seen this, as the carriers are at differing stages of technology adoption, all those things are different. There is no one looking across all those carriers, or those carriers themselves are not driving those standards for those solutions that are driving to the marketplace. That's essentially what we do and have done for many years. And then orchestration, again, is back to driving that through the whole process. So you've got an end-to-end workflow consuming these APIs and really driving things into the marketplace differently.
Okay, let's look at a future state holistic solution by SMC3. We call it the SMC3 platform. And what it really means is all of our products and the APIs from the carriers play well together in the same space. So we have surrounding the thing are branded analytical solutions, Rateware, Carrier Connect. We have BidSense, which is a transportation RFP product to conduct a bid, and Batchmark, which is a high-speed analytical engine for people who just want to do analysis. Transportation pricing is key. It's key for us. And so we're looking at, in our world, we would have not only LTL class rates, but density rates. We would collect rates from our products and carrier APIs, include truckload rates, so we'd have a mileage engine, include the small package carriers, so we would have that visibility. And another important part of pricing, and it's a real pain point for all of the community, is accessorial charges, the rules that apply for inside delivery or some sort of custom service that a carrier would perform, liftgate, and fuel surcharge. All those are accessorials, and right now it's a real problem that people are trying to solve in the audit process and the analysis process, in the carrier selection process, is how to accurately capture those charges and attach them to a shipment price. We're developing an accessorial engine where it would not only be populated with individual carriers' pricing, but it'd be populated with some sort of standard accessorial and rules tariff to complement all the other pricing. A good example of that benchmarking of pricing would be our Czar-like product. Most of you probably heard of it, but last year we studied 115 million freight bills. These are individual freight bills over a year's period of time to gather information about lane balance, lane-based pricing, all the market study to show here's an accurate level of a benchmark price in a particular lane. So that would obviously be a core component of our pricing platform. Once you get out of the pricing platform, you have to manage the event. We've talked a lot about that, shipment status, pro generation, bill of lading, et cetera. All of those transportation events as a shipment moves through the supply chain. But when you have all of this working well together as a comprehensive solution, then you really have the ability to do additional innovation, to come up with new business services and new items for the consumers in the marketplace. One of them, as an illustration, would be dynamic-based pricing. That's been talked about a lot in the press and in the communications between sales and shippers and 3PLs recently. Nobody's really nailed it down yet. Everybody's looking for what is the proper balance of a spot market price versus a contractual price. That dynamic pricing is a perfect place the platform is a perfect place to work that out so that we're not only meeting the requirements of the carrier, but meeting the requirements of whoever's consuming that price. And there's a lot of things we're experimenting with and talking with our customers about, but no doubt, just as you've seen in other industries, there is going to be an opportunity for carriers to balance lanes or to gain some individual shipments that they want based upon a dynamic pricing engine. Okay, let's end with just some logistic trends, and what we'll try to do is work in how the API solution, the platform solution, will impact these trends. We all know that LTL is under competitive pressures, a lot of cost pressures, not just equipment costs and the cost of fuel, but labor costs. Big item on a carrier's scorecard. The platforms will allow us to automate manual processes and manage events more effectively. Some of our early users of this system have really given us some very specific areas where we can remove labor from a process, make it more automated, and have a true winning solution. Right now, some of the solutions don't provide the required visibility to make good supply chain decisions, and sometimes they overinform. So in a platform, you would be able to tailor a solution to the visibility that's required for the problem you're trying to solve. A proactive supply chain means a lot of analysis and dealing with exceptions. So in a platform, you could provide various ways of analyzing pre-event management, and you could also, once an event is launched, you don't have to deal with it every time it makes a movement or every change. You only deal with the exceptions, and our platform will allow people to dial up and dial down the event so that they only get alerts, for instance, when a shipment's in distress. That would be a real characteristic of a well-engineered platform. And then, there is an advantage in many supply chain solutions to be as close to real time as possible, and in a platform, you can be real time. So those are explorations that will be determined as we meet with our customers and work through the problem-solving aspect of a platform. Well, Jeff, that concludes our formal conversation today. We have listed on this final slide information for contact for more information about SMC3, or you can go to our website, smc3.com. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, great. Thank you, Danny and David. That was a terrific analysis of the key market factors related to API. We've received a few questions from the audience, and to get the ball rolling, let's start with this one. What role does EDI play in the transportation economy? In other words, can APIs replace today's EDI?
Okay. From our perspective, EDI is fairly well entrenched in a lot of industries and a lot of, for example, big box retailers that have built their complete applications around EDI. So our belief is EDI will be around a while. We do believe APIs are a great value add along working with EDI, not necessarily a replacement of EDI today. 5-10 years down the road, it may evolve to that, but there's a good ways to go to get EDI essentially out of some of these embedded systems in some of the retailers.
Okay, great. Here's another one. The person with the question saying, our company has a big data initiative and our supply chain is a primary target. How does your platform concept support data analytics?
Yeah, we hear a lot about big data initiatives, and in our platform, a couple of things to keep in mind, we've talked about it, is who owns the data, who has the visibility to data, what is a protocol. Our standardization process is really key because we're handing off to you all your data in a standardized format. Therefore, you can use your own data analysis tools, combine it with other data you have, and really do big data type of projects. On some of our products, for instance, our Batchmark product, that is a data analysis tool, and you can access that as an API and run certain reports same way as you could do with BidSense. But in every case, we're only going to expose the raw data or the refined data from an analytical to people who have a clear custody of that data and permission from a carrier to receive it.
Okay, great. All right, we have a couple more here. You both had discussed some specific scenarios for transactional services versus analytical services. So that said, what are the general guidelines that apply when determining which one applies in a specific situation?
So there's some specific business scenarios where that really starts to come into play, and a lot of it's around how much analysis you're trying to do and the volume of data you're trying to process. A good example is optimization. If you're going through an optimization run and you're looking at 10,000 shipments, let's say, and each one of those shipments has got to be re-rated 200 times, the volume of that processing really starts to lend itself to analytical versus a transactional API. Transactional would be more about, I need a spot quote during the day, or I need some basic information, or I'm looking at 10 or 20 shipments. A 2 to 3 second lag time to make that happen is consumable, but when you start applying that 2 to 3 second lag time to 10,000, 100,000, and the numbers go up from there, it really starts to drive itself to an analytical solution.
Okay, terrific. And here's another question. The person is saying, we use a TMS, but some of the event orchestration you discussed sounds like added value for us. Can our TMS work in concert with your platform?
Yes, and we're actively engaged in conversations with our TMS alliances as well as our enterprise alliances and other people who have transportation application. You may have noticed there's a lot of TMSs out there, and we're engaged at some level with all of them on how our platform would fit into their delivery to their customers. So we can tailor, working with a TMS provider, we could provide them with the information they need to process, to orchestrate an event for you, to complete an analysis. That's things that we've been doing for many, many years. We're very closely aligned with their technologists, so that's a great opportunity. We actually see it as the best opportunity for a platform, but of course we'll be dealing with people who are with customers that are building their own TMS or building something in-house or maybe modifying their enterprise system to address one of these business problems. That's a great question.
All right, very good. Well, that concludes our webcast for today. On behalf of Logistics Management Magazine, I'd like to say thank you to Danny Slayton and David Knight for making this webcast possible and sharing their market intelligence with us as well. And also a big thanks to SMC3 and Jumpstart 2017 for sponsoring this webcast. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.